Hello everyone and welcome back once again to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today we'll be continuing our series on metrics-aware game design with a continuation of our talk on retention. Last week, I went into detail about the concepts of player retention and why we use retention as a critical barometer for the performance of our game. I went over some of the cases where awareness of retention is important in various differing types of games, and also the methods that are typically used in measuring player retention. If you're just joining from this video, though not absolutely imperative, it's probably worth watching last week's video before this one in order to familiarize yourself with the general concepts of retention before we get into the nuts and bolts of designing with retention in mind. This week, we're going to lay the groundwork for retention mechanics design by understanding exactly what our game is and what it'll need. Obviously, when you design your game, there's never going to be a case where you're consciously planning on causing your players to quit playing the game, churn out, or run out of things to do, with very few exceptions. The entire point of entertainment in general is to capture the attention of our audience and keep them entertained for the duration of their interaction with our product, so it stands to reason that we wouldn't be designing with loss of players in mind. This is common sense, but beyond simply designing not to lose players, designing around retention requires that we're mindful of mechanics that will encourage your players to remain engaged with your game, those one more round moments that will keep players from putting it down, and also being aware of possible churn points and knowing how to design around them, mitigating anticipated player loss, and bringing your players back for more. You want your players to want to keep on playing, and it'll be useful for you to have a level of self-awareness that will help you to understand the needs of your game for where to focus your efforts in retention. Good game design, of course, will go a long way to contributing to this, so making the best game that you possibly can will always be the first mandate, but we should always consider what we can add to an already good game in order to keep your players and to keep bringing them back for more. Now, when considering retention mechanics, the first thing you want to evaluate is exactly how you want to be retaining your players. Depending on your game's play pattern profile, which is an amalgamation of anticipated session length and the anticipated product lifespan, you'll be wanting to focus either on long-term retention or short. Consider the type of game that you're creating and the platform. If you're creating a narrative-driven single-player game, your retention strategy will be different from that of a competitive PC or console multiplayer game, which will also be different from a free-to-play mobile game. Let's think about this profile by breaking it down a bit. We want to be considering session length and product lifespan. Session length, for those of you who aren't familiar, describes the minimum amount of time that a player will be playing your game uninterrupted in a single sitting or session while still experiencing a complete chunk of play, which I'll call a round, since quite frequently a shorter game is broken up by individual discrete rounds with a common menu to tie them together. We care about session length because a longer session length tells you, as the creator of the game, that the players are more invested in the game that you're creating and they're having trouble putting it down. That's always a very good sign. They're sticking around to see more of the game, or just to experience the game more completely. If it were as simple as keeping players in your game for a long time, however, we'd have solved retention already. But even though we always strive to retain players for as long as possible per session, we also have some well-defined session lengths that we should use as benchmarks when designing. The average mobile game has a session length of about 5 minutes. A PC or console multiplayer game is closer to 30 minutes, and the single-player game can be up to a few hours at a time, depending on content. This all speaks to sort of lifestyle and environment that surrounds the device that's being used, and also the type of content that the game offers. In most, if not all cases, we strive to extend session length, so please don't confuse session length benchmarks with how long you want your players to be playing a game, as much as how short of a session you will be willing to accommodate, which is a fairly valuable distinction to make. Though you want your players to spend long sessions engaging in all of your mechanics for as long as you can capture your players, a mobile game still needs to be short enough to be played during a bathroom break, essentially, and a multiplayer game short enough that a player isn't reluctant to jump in before going off to do something else. Consider the context in which your player will be playing your game. That will define how long each round within the session should be, which will afford your players the option to stop, or even better, to keep going when they finish one. Now, contrasting with session length, we also have product lifespan. Where we plan to grab our players and keep them interested every session, we also need to consider the lifespan of a game, from start to completion. This describes how long a player will continue playing the game overall, not necessarily hours played, but how many days or months they're expected to continue playing the game before stopping. Session length and product lifespan often have a proportionally inverse relationship, mobile games being designed to have short sessions but that maintain a player in some cases for years, while the average narrative-driven game will likely see the player completing the game and stopping after a week or two, on purpose. As with session length, however, we don't necessarily want to say goodbye to our players after they've finished playing the main content of our game, and that's where product lifespan and retention mechanics that contribute to it come into play. By incentivizing repeat sessions and building into your game enough to experience that your players will continue to explore and engage, we can expand our lifespan. We care about product lifespan, of course, as it speaks to, as the name suggests, the longevity of our product, and it also gives us the chance to bring our players further into our game by creating additional content in the form of DLC later on, which will require that a player is interested in staying in your game to experience the content you're adding when it is added. The holy grail, of course, would be long sessions with long lifespan, but in practice, only a few select games have managed to really achieve that, like World of Warcraft and The Sims. They, however, bottled lightning in a way that very few games have since managed, and in each case, though there are a number of products that attempt to recreate that perfect storm, few really do. So from early on in your design cycle, I suggest that you put some time into truly considering your options and making a realistic estimate on both of these factors. You should know from very early on which best fits your own product. Once you've got that done, you should start planning on designing around those 2 points and creating mechanics that speak to retention in a way that accommodates your game's play pattern profile. So next week, I intend to look at just that. We'll begin with a look of games of varying session lengths and what sort of game mechanics best speak to retention for those. And then, in the following week, we'll look at how to extend the product lifespan, whether that be keeping your 2-week-long players for a month or retaining your short session players for years at a time. I hope that you'll come along for the ride. Now thank you as always for joining me in this week's ThursDev, and I hope that you found it entertaining, educational, enlightening, or any of the above. There's still a lot to cover, so I'm looking forward to seeing you here next week. Until then though, thank you for watching, and take care.